Go, yeah.
Fantastic. So we're good to start. Birshus Abimori, I got a pleasant surprise as I was on my way over. He phoned me, he said, "Where are you?" Said, "I'm on my way." So with my father's permission, just to explore perhaps one of the most difficult aspects of this week's parasha, which is Korach, is navigating our way through the rebellion, as it were. It's one of those parashas that reminds us that we can sometimes be quite an argumentative people. Sometimes we find things to pick fights over. How many Jews does it take to change a light bulb? The right answer isn't change. The right answer is you won't find the right light bulb. And sometimes we'd rather sit in darkness than actually admit that the other person knows which light bulb to put in. So the very, very beginning, I'll just point out a Rashi, and I think that the question that this Rashi, he's quoting the Medrash, the question that Rashi that is raised through this Rashi is fundamental, and through it we can gain a better and broader understanding of the depth and nuance of certain characters in the Torah that otherwise we may have assumed one way, but perhaps there's more to it than meets the eye. So the very beginning, we read the Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhar ben Gahos ben Levi. So Korach, son of Yitzhar, son of Gahos, son of Levi, V'Doson va'Aviram. So Doson and Aviram, these are two members of the tribe of Ruvain. We've met them. We've met them many times before. They've made their grand and what will be their final appearance here. B'nai Eliav v'Oim ben Peles b'nai Ruvain. So they join 250 members from the tribe of Ruvain, join Korach's rebellion. And Rashi is, I think, the third Rashi on the parasha. Perhaps, sorry, it's the fourth. He explains as follows, quoting the Medrash: "B'shvil she'ashevet Ruvain shari b'chaniyosam teimona shochein legahas." Because the way that the camp was arranged was that the southernmost point, as it were, of the camp of the tribe of Kahat, which is where Korach is from, they were next door neighbors with the tribe of Reuven. So Rashi explains this proximity between the two tribes caused Nishtatu im Korach b'machlukoso. They therefore joined, as it were, they partnered with Korach in his rebellion. And Rashi quotes at the end of this statement the well-known phrase. It appears in Ethics of the Fathers. It appears across the Gemara in multiple places. Oy Rasha v'oy Shchena, says the Tanchuma. Oy Rasha, oy Shchena, which means they say you can't choose your family. You also can't choose your neighbors. As some of us, we've had some interesting encounters with our neighbors since we moved to Edgeware. So you can't choose your neighbors. So Rashi's point is, why was it that Dasan and Aviram get dragged into this rebellion, this uprising that is spearheaded by Korah, his immediate family and followers? Because of the proximity between their two camps. The bad influence. And what Korach was doing rubs off onto his neighbors. And who were his neighbors? The tribe of Ruvain. And who were members of the tribe of Ruvain? Dasan and Aviram. Okay. Now pause. I don't like spoilers. We don't spoon feed. What's the question? Why did Dasan and Aviram get involved in the rebellion? Because they're neighbors with Korah. Oila Rasha, Oila Shvena, which means woe to a Rasha, an evildoer, and woe to his neighbor who's going to be affected by the evildoer's behavior. This is a slightly bothersome question that this raises. I don't know if anyone on Zoom is able to contribute. We'll have a chat, but yeah, see if you want to. Have they ever previously needed an excuse to get involved in trouble? This is yeah, these are the troublemakers par excellence. And we can go through, not go into too much there because I know we're on a time limit here, but let's go through. I mean, we can work on this together. The occasions throughout the Torah where trouble happens and who's at the center of the trouble, who's stirring the pot every single time, it's them. Every single time. We know the very first occasion we encounter them in Chazal, our sages explain, is of course the story where Moshe saved slave by killing the Egyptian taskmaster and burying the body in the sand. And who sees him doing this? Chazal say, and they approach him the next day when they're fighting with each other. And Moshe says, Lama why are you striking your friend? To which, we're not sure which one was throwing the first punch, but one of them turns around and says, who appointed you, the judge and the prince, over us? Who gave you authority over us? Who are you to talk? What did you do just yesterday? You struck an Egyptian and you killed him. And Moshe realized how to do. They're going to slander him to Pharaoh. And indeed, they do that, which causes what does Moshe have to do as a result? He has to take evasive action. He runs away to, he has to go to Midian. So that's encounter number one. Encounter number two is a fascinating one, and this we'll develop this. We should have time to develop this a little bit further. And that is just after we have officially left the land of Egypt. So it's in Perek Yud Daled, the 14th Perek of Shemos. And we read that at the moment, as it were, just to set the scene, we, the Jewish people, are, as it were, camped at the shore of the Red Sea. We're right there. We're at the Yam Suf. And as this is happening, what's going on back in Egypt? What's Pharaoh saying to himself? He does the oi, the classic oi, the shrug and the oi, let them go. That was a terrible mistake. I panicked. Got to bring them back. Says the pasuk, V'Amar Paro livnei Yisrael. Pharaoh said, Livnei Yisrael, Mevuchim hein ba'aretz. They're confused. They're lost in the desert. Sogar aleihem amidbar. The desert has closed them in. He starts to see an avenue of hope whereby he can bring us back and, as it were, set us as his slaves again. So the confusing part of this pasuk is Va'amar Paro, and Paro said, Livnei Yisrael, which means literally to the children of Israel. Now the problem there is, well, who's he speaking to? Who's he talking to? He doesn't have one of these. He's not on Zoom. He's on a Zoom chat with us. Who's he talking to? Moshe's gone. Everyone's gone. He's in Memphis or wherever his capital was in Egypt on the Nile Delta, and we're down by the Red Sea. So who's he talking to? Now, the classic interpretation among Parashanim, those who prefer the literal and the simplest interpretation, say that it's not Livnei Yisrael, it's Al, as in about. He's sort of talking to himself in front of his ministers about Bnei Yisrael. It doesn't say Al, does it? It says Livnei Yisrael. There's a fascinating explanation that he is talking to Dasan and Aviram, who had made the conscious decision to stay behind, not to go back. They didn't leave in the first place. They stayed behind. Such was their distrust in the leadership represented by Moshe, that when Moshe said, okay, we get to the sea, hold your breath. And Dasan and Aviram were like, okay, we don't trust you, we're staying behind. So these are the Bnei Yisrael, the two Jews left in Egypt that Pharaoh is talking to. We'll get back to that momentarily. We learn later on, the Gemara explains as well, when the manna falls from heaven, there is a clear instruction what is not to be done each and every day to the man when you gather it into your tent. The one thing you're not allowed to do, cannot keep it overnight. It's meant to represent bitachon, trust in Hashem, that even though today it disappears, you will have more tomorrow. Don't panic. And we're told that there are some people who purposefully make a demonstration of leaving some of their man behind. Who were those people? It's them again. It's our favorite daring duo, Dasan and Aviram again. And then, I mean, there's so many we can go into. I'm just explaining the famous incidents. And then finally, we read this literally a couple of weeks ago, in fact, last week, in Shalach. After the spies bring back their report, the people do what? People panic. I mean, we're Jews, we panic easily. The people panic. And then there's this remarkable suggestion. They're accusing Moshe, why have you brought us here to die in the desert? This was your plan all along. And then Vayomru ish el achiv. One man said to his brother, Nitna Rosh, let's appoint a new leader. V'nashuv Mitzrayim. And let's go back to Egypt. Again, say Chazal, who's talking to who? Who's talking to their brother? The most famous brothers we have, probably, in terms of troublemaking. Dasan's talking to Aviram and suggesting this. So we come back to the Tanchuma that Rashi quotes in the very beginning of our parsha, and it's a remarkable sequence of events. Who is apparently influencing who? Which way is the flow of influence? Which direction is it flowing in? According to Rashi, quoting the Tanchuma. Who's influencing who to rebel? Korach is influencing Dasan and Aviram. And the question stands, it's obvious. What influence do they need? They're the chief architects of rebellion the whole way through the Torah. So what on earth's going on? So to answer this, we have to look back. In fact, it's the Targum Yonasan who gives that explanation that they stayed behind in Egypt. He didn't go with the rest. And the Bnei Israel that Pharaoh talks to about bringing us back, he's talking to them, the last Jews in town. Let's go back to that. If that's true, spot the logical problem. If it's true that they stayed behind in Egypt, problem. What are they doing here? You know, I didn't have helicopters. You know, well, how do they get to us now? Can't be in two places at once. If they stayed behind in Egypt, presumably they died with the rest of the Egyptians. They either stayed there forever, or they would have died when the sea drowned the Egyptians. How do they get to us here to carry on causing trouble? How do they get to the manor? They weren't supposed to be there. How did they get back? How did they rejoin us? And this opens up, as I said, sometimes we have to take a step back and realize the characters we encounter in the Torah, they're not so much characters as we would assume in a story or a book or a play. They are archetypes. They represent something fundamental in this world. And therefore, it is fitting and appropriate to try and delve as deep as we can to understand what that archetype is that they represent. The question is how they got back. And the answer to this is it's in the Birnbaum and he quotes, I think it's a Medrash Tehillim, although I think the consensus is that we've lost whatever manuscript he had. We've since lost it in 300, 400 years or so since he wrote this. But he points out a remarkable thing. Anyone here know you just said it not so long ago, Az Yashir? You know it well. You know it pretty well. There's a pasuk that's basically quoted twice. It's repeated verbatim. And I'll read the first one. It says as follows, but I'm not going to sing it, don't worry. It's too early. It's too early in the morning to inflict pain on people. This is Vayavo b'nei Yisrael b'toch hayam bayabasha. B'nei Yisrael entered the sea bayabasha on dry land. V'hamayim lahem choma. I lied. Miminam mismola. A wall for them to the left and to the right. That's in Chaf base. Chaf tes. Barely a handful of Psukim later says, they went in the midst of the sea, on dry land, again, and Chazal ask, what's the repetition for? Now again, the simplest answer is, and I was astonished when I found out this was actually a thing in Tanakh, it's what we call poetic license. It's a song. It's a song, and songs have a chorus, do they not? So certain key themes, you would expect it to be repeated. The dramatic moments of a song, it's repeated. This is basically a chorus, the chorus of Az Yashir. That's the simplest explanation. There's the Birnbaum a remarkable thing. He says actually what this alludes to, and again he's quoting in Midrash, it would seem we've lost the manuscripts for, unfortunately. He says the sea split twice. Oh, yeah, I know. It's too early in the morning for these revelations. I might not get invited back again. I don't know. He said the sea split once that we all know about. We tell the story about. Then there was a low-key clandestine split on behalf behind in Egypt. And the second mention in Chaftes, the later mention, references the fact that Dasan and Aviram came to their senses, walked on their own to the Red Sea, looked in the distance and saw the Jewish camp moving off into the desert, looked up to the heavens and said, we want to join them. And the sea said, fine. And it's split again. Now, now 1 second. Okay, we're not in Kansas anymore. I mean, okay, so again, in this rebellion, had it not been for Korach, they wouldn't have joined it. That's strange. They're the chief architects of troublemaking. If they are the chief architects of troublemaking, what on earth have they done to deserve their own private splitting of the sea? This is a VIP section. This is like front row tickets, action replay, VAR reviews, everything, just for them. The sea splits, and we sing about it again. What have they done to deserve that? Anyone got any suggestions? There's something about them that we don't understand. There is another question, by the way, that many of our sages ask, which is if they were so evil, and again, we don't have time to discuss this now, if they were so evil, why didn't they die with the 4/5 of the Jewish people in the plague? It's a tradition we're familiar with. That is it's the same question, really. It's on the same spectrum as this. There's something about them we don't fully comprehend yet. And that is there's another story. In fact, it's the first time we ever encountered them. Moshe comes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, yes. Moshe says, I've got a great idea. Can you let my people go? Just for 3 days. It'll be a slight drop in GDP, but we'll be back in 3 days. Pharaoh's response is, not only will I not let them go, but I'm going to stop giving. Sure. And what am I going to do to the quota of the output every day? Quota stays the same. Raw materials go down. Off you go. This, now you'll learn your lesson. Don't ask. Moshe and Aaron leave the palace, we're told in the Torah, and they encounter the Shotrei B'nai Israel, the officers, as it were. And we have an analogy from the Second World War, the Judenrat, as it were. The Jewish police are standing there. And they say to Moshe and Aaron, what on earth have you done? It was bad enough before you turned up, and all you've done is made it worse. And we're told these Shotrim, these officers, they made a conscious decision. When they broke the news to the Jewish people that thanks to this intervention, you can start to see where the hate came. Thanks to Moshe's intervention, you now have the same quota with no raw materials, but don't worry, they said. Whatever beatings are meant to quota, we'll take it on our own backs. And our sages say that 2 of those officers who were beaten every single day on behalf of the Jewish people, within an inch of their lives, because they refused to pass on the harder work to their underlings, as it were. 2 of those people were Dasan and Aviram. And their antagonism, as it were, their opposition to Moshe, is rooted in a love of the Jewish people. So whenever they may have a negative effect on the wider community, they step up and they step in. When they see him killing an Egyptian taskmaster, why are they panicking? Why do they? What's motivating them? Hatred of Moshe or love of the Jewish people? Think about it. We read it and we see hatred of Moshe, irrational, stubborn, jealous. Hatred of Moshe, it's not. What motivates them is, if news gets out that guy is killed an Egyptian, what's going to happen to the rest of us? Whereas if we report him to Pharaoh, what's Pharaoh going to think of the Jewish people? They're loyal, they're trustworthy, they've got my back, and maybe conditions will get better. So remarkably, every single decision they make, when Moshe says the manna is going to fall from heaven, but don't leave any of it for tomorrow, don't worry, you'll be okay. They hear that and they think, but what if it doesn't fall tomorrow? Then our people are going to starve. So we'll keep some behind for the sake of our people. Every single step, every decision they take, even though it's the wrong decision, the motives behind it are pure and noble. Their opposition is rooted in a love of the Jewish people. And for this reason, they merit a second, as it were, in this obscure midrash, a second splitting of the sea. For this reason, they merit surviving the plague of darkness because their motives are so pure. But then you get to Al Parashah. Now perhaps we can begin to understand where the flow of influence is actually going. Because now you've got 2 people whose antagonism to Moshe is rooted in love and selflessness. And they live next door to someone whose antagonism to Moshe is rooted in ego, jealousy, and self-interest. The saddest thing about Reuven, the tribe of Reuven joining Korah, is by his own, they stood to gain nothing. He wanted to be in charge. His side of the tribe of Levi. He didn't care about Reuven. He didn't care about Dasan and Aviram. He didn't care about the 250 of their co-tribalists who joined them. He didn't care. He was in it for himself and no one else. And so for the first time, Dasan and Aviram, those chief troublemakers, they encounter someone whose opposition to Moshe is based in selfishness and based in ego. And that influences them to join this rebellion. They think, or in fact, they confuse the cause and the effect. They think that the ends justify the means. The ends is, we share the same goal. Korach wants to get rid of Moshe. We want to get rid of Moshe. But the reasons we want to do that, they don't see this, are fundamentally different. And therefore, in our parasha, and this is the Tanchuma, what it means is that the flow of influence is not from them to him, it's from Korach to them. And for the first time, there's selfless love of the Jewish people. Again, misguided as it was and misapplied as it was, for the first time it's corrupted by someone, and that someone is corrupt. And so perhaps we take away from this the importance, as I've said, of delving as deeply as we can into the rich personalities we encounter in the Torah. There's always more to them than meets the eye. And through them, we can learn an enormous amount ourselves of how we have a lovely rest of the week. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank
It's a
you.
good thing I didn't come early. We would have finished.
Thank you very much. That was very, very, very spot on time. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll ask you again, I think, if you're willing to come. I'll say goodbye to those on Zoom. See you all again when next time you join us. I will now.